Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the universe preparing us for who we're meant to become. In the unforgiving heartland, where empires rise and fall with the harvest, a tale of soil, betrayal, and quiet power is about to unfold. Prepare yourselves for the unraveling of a dynasty. The heavy rain was a cold, unforgiving sheet, blurring the sprawling, modern ranch headquarters into a watercolor smear. Brad Sterling, immaculate even amidst the deluge, stood silhouetted against the gleaming glass entrance of the Thorne Valley Cattle Empire's main office. His custom-tailored suit, a dark shroud against the oppressive gray sky, seemed to repel the rain, much like his ambition repelled empathy. The scent of his expensive cologne, usually a declaration of dominance, was momentarily muted by the deluge, but the venom in his voice was not. "Get off my property, you old beggar. You're not just a liability, you're an embarrassment to everything we've built here." He punctuated his words with a shove, a contemptuous kick aimed at the muddy boot of the elderly man before him. His face, usually a mask of controlled composure, was twisted into a sneer of pure, unadulterated disgust. Elias Thorne, founder and true owner of the very ground Sterling claimed, stumbled, his ancient bones protesting the abrupt force, but caught himself before falling fully into the slick, red mud. The impact resonated deep within him, a familiar echo of betrayal, but it was the humiliation, sharper than any physical pain, that truly seized his breath. His tattered flannel clung to his lean frame, soaked through, each thread a testament to decades of honest labor. His muck boots, caked thick with the very soil he cherished, grounded him even as the world seemed to tilt. Water streamed down his weathered face, mingling with the sting of the cold, but his eyes, ancient and calm, held a dangerous spark that Sterling, blinded by his own arrogance and the torrential rain, completely missed. It was a spark of defiance, of ancient wisdom, and of an unwavering resolve that was about to ignite a firestorm. The gate guards, the same men who'd mocked Elias just an hour earlier, watched with grim satisfaction, their faces unreadable, their loyalty a shifting sand under Sterling's heel. Sterling stood panting, his expensive, waterproof jacket glistening, a triumphant sneer contorting his features. He believed he was kicking out a worthless bum, a relic of a past he despised. In truth, he had just fired his boss, not merely an employee but the very soul of the Thorne Valley. The truth, heavy and imminent, waited just beneath the surface of the rain-drenched earth, ready to break through like a spring flood, poised to drown Sterling in its undeniable current. The storm outside was merely a prelude to the tempest brewing within the ranch's hollowed core. 1 hour earlier, the sun, still an indifferent pale orb in a rapidly darkening sky, had cast long, indifferent shadows across the vast expanse of the Thorne Valley Cattle Empire. Elias Thorne, a man whose presence was as fundamental to this land as the deep, rich topsoil itself, walked with a deliberate, unhurried gait down a service road. Each step was a quiet communion, his mud-caked boots pressing familiar imprints into the damp earth, a ghost's journey across a landscape he no longer fully recognized. His only companion was a gnarled walking stick, worn smooth by decades of calloused hands, a silent testament to a life lived in harmony with the earth. It was a conduit to memory, each knot and groove a story whispered against his palm. Around him, the ranch hummed with a different kind of life than he remembered, a stark, sterile efficiency that felt alien, almost blasphemous. Giant, autonomous feeders glided silently across vast pastures, dispensing feed with robotic precision. Their soulless were a far cry from the lowing cattle and the shouted commands he once knew. Drones with whirring blades dotted the sky, monitoring livestock movements and pasture health. Their omnipresent buzz a constant reminder of remote control, of hands-off management. Sleek, polished pickups, emblems of corporate investment, sped by, raising dust that tasted of asphalt and ambition rather than honest earth. The very air felt different, stripped of its authenticity. Elias' own attire, a faded, patched flannel shirt, denim overalls stained with the indelible marks of honest labor, and muck boots that had known every puddle and furrow on this land for 50 years, was a direct counterpoint to the high-tech landscape. He looked undeniably like a relic, a ghost from a simpler, more honest time, his presence a living, breathing accusation against the sanitized future. The fabric of his shirt, softened by countless washings and the sun's relentless embrace, felt like a second skin, each tear and mend a scar of his dedication. The air, usually thick with the rich scent of cattle and alfalfa, now carried a faint, metallic tang of new machinery and something subtly chemical, an antiseptic undercurrent that spoke of management, not husbandry. It was the smell of efficiency devoid of soul. Elias noted the small things, the subtle shifts in the land he knew intimately. A stretch of fence post that looked hastily mended, a patch of pasture where the grass seemed thinner, less vibrant than it should be, hinting at overworked soil, at corners cut. His eyes, keen and unblinking, absorbed it all, filing away observations with the precision of a seasoned rancher, a quiet forensic examination of his dying legacy. Every blade of struggling grass, every faint chemical scent, was a whisper of the cancer festering at Thorne Valley's heart. As he approached the main gate, a formidable structure of wrought iron and polished steel, he felt a familiar ache in his knees, a physical manifestation of the weight he carried. But his resolve held steady, a core of unyielding granite within him. The gatehouse, a small, insulated cube of tinted glass, seemed more designed to keep people out than to welcome them in, a sterile fortress against the very nature it purported to manage. Two guards, young men in crisp, tailored uniforms, emerged, their expressions a mixture of boredom and suspicion, their faces devoid of the warmth he remembered from the old ranch hands. One, a burly man with a neatly trimmed beard, stepped forward. "Can I help you, old-timer?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension, his eyes raking over Elias' humble attire as if it were an offensive stain. A flicker of something unreadable, a ghost of the fire that had built this empire, passed through Elias' eyes, a premonition of the reckoning to come. He felt the cold, hard glint of their judgment, the instant dismissal that came with his perceived lack of status, and it was precisely what he had come to witness. The subtle sting of their contempt was a crucial data point in his silent audit. "I'm here to see the manager," Elias said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly deep for a man of his age, carrying the resonance of decades spent calling cattle and commanding respect. He leaned slightly on his walking stick, his weight shifting, a subtle indication of his rootedness to the ground beneath him, a living extension of the earth itself. "I have an appointment." The words felt strange in his mouth, an almost comical pretense for the man who owned every blade of grass, every head of cattle, every brick in the buildings beyond. He felt the ironic absurdity of his declaration, a king requesting an audience with his usurper. The second guard, a younger, leaner man with a smirk playing on his lips, chuckled, the sound grating and disrespectful. "An appointment with Mr. Sterling. Do you even know who Mr. Sterling is, Grandpa? He doesn't see just anyone." He gestured vaguely at Elias' appearance, the implied insult hanging heavy in the cool air, thick with the scent of distant diesel fuel. This smell, usually a comforting aroma of productivity, now seemed to mock him, a symbol of a progress that had forgotten its origins, severing its roots from the very soil that fed it. Elias simply nodded, his gaze unwavering, taking in the guards' clean boots, their unsoiled uniforms, the absence of any true grit about them. Their hands were soft, their faces unlined by sun and toil. He felt the subtle vibration of the heavy machinery beneath his feet, a low thrum that spoke of the immense, impersonal scale of the operation now, a mechanical heartbeat replacing the organic rhythm of the land. He did not press, did not argue. He had come to observe, to understand the rot, to confirm the extent of the cancer, not to immediately confront it. He merely offered a small, knowing smile, a gesture the guards clearly misinterpreted as either senility or resignation. They allowed him to pass, not out of respect, but out of a dismissive belief that he posed no real threat. A harmless old man wandering where he didn't belong, an inconvenient shadow easily ignored. The gate swung open with a soft hydraulic hiss, a gateway not just into the ranch, but into the heart of his own undoing, or perhaps his reclamation. The subtle hum of the automated gates closing behind him was a final note in the symphony of his deliberate humiliation, a sound that promised revelation. The main office, a sprawling monument to polished surfaces and hushed efficiency, was a stark contrast to the dust and open air outside, a glass and steel bubble divorced from the earthy reality of the ranch. The air conditioning was set to a chill that made the hair on Elias' arms prickle, a clinical coldness that felt designed to purge any lingering scent of the outdoors. The scent was a sterile mix of lemon polish and stale coffee, a far cry from the honest aroma of hay and livestock, of sweat and soil, that had once permeated these halls. He stepped through the automatic glass doors, his muck boots, now caked with the ranch's own dark soil, leaving faint, earthy tracks on the pristine, light-colored tile. It was a small act, almost unconscious, yet profoundly symbolic, a quiet rebellion of the land against the sterile ambition that sought to dominate it. Behind the towering, curved reception desk, a woman whose name, Tiffany, was embroidered neatly on her pristine blouse, looked up. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and impeccably manicured nails seemed to bristle at the sight of Elias, her very posture radiating an almost physical repulsion. Her eyes, sharp and judgmental, fixated instantly on the muddy boots, then slowly, disdainfully, swept up to his face. A thin, almost imperceptible wrinkle formed between her eyebrows, a micro-expression of disgust that spoke volumes. She didn't speak, but her posture, rigid and disapproving, communicated everything. "You are an unwelcome anomaly." Elias approached the desk, his presence feeling like an anachronism in this sleek, modern space, a lone tree in a concrete jungle. He cleared his throat, the sound a low, almost guttural rumble that seemed out of place in the hushed environment. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm here to see the manager, Elias Thorne." He offered his name with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being recognized, accustomed to respect being an inherent part of his identity. But in this sterile environment, in this world of manufactured importance, his name meant nothing. It was merely a sound, an unknown echo. Tiffany's gaze dropped to a clipboard on her desk, then flicked back to Elias, lingering again on his boots with a palpable distaste. Her voice, when it came, was clipped and laced with a barely concealed disdain, each word a finely sharpened blade. "Do you have an appointment, sir? Because I don't see a Thorne on the schedule, and we don't usually hire day laborers off the street, Grandpa." She emphasized Grandpa with a patronizing tone, as if speaking to a slow-witted child. The subtle shift in her weight, the slight tilting of her head, conveyed a clear message of dismissal, of his utter irrelevance. The cold, artificial light overhead cast harsh shadows, making the office feel less like a place of business and more like a stage for judgment, a tribunal of the superficial. Elias felt a familiar pang, not of anger, for anger was a luxury he could not afford in this crucial observation, but of a deep, sorrowful disappointment. This was his asterisk ranch, his legacy, built from the sweat of his brow and the wisdom of generations, and he was being treated like an unwanted vagrant by his own employees, by the very people entrusted with its care. He could have shown her his ID, asserted his authority, let the truth of his name shatter her manufactured superiority, but that wasn't the purpose of this visit. He needed to see the true face of the operation, unvarnished by the respect his name commanded, unburdened by the weight of his reputation. He needed to experience the everyday reality of the system Sterling had put in place, to feel the rot from the inside out. "No appointment, I suppose," he conceded, his voice even, revealing none of the turmoil within, none of the seismic shift of pain he felt. "Perhaps I could just wait. I have some papers that need to be delivered." He gestured vaguely to the inside pocket of his damp flannel, where the fateful envelope resided, its contents poised to unravel an empire. Tiffany merely waved a dismissive hand towards a row of sleek, uncomfortable-looking chairs arranged along a featureless wall, as if shooing away a bothersome fly. "You can wait, but Mr. Sterling is very busy. Don't expect anything soon." Her tone was a definitive period at the end of a long, humiliating sentence. She returned to her computer screen, her fingers flying over the keyboard, her posture radiating an air of untouchable professionalism, a cold barrier against any further interaction. Elias chose the furthest chair, settling down with a soft sigh that was lost in the hum of the air conditioning, a sound as impersonal and indifferent as Tiffany's gaze. The plastic of the seat was cold against his damp clothes, an alien sensation. He sat, a lone island of weathered authenticity in a sea of corporate artifice, a stark monument to a forgotten truth. The whispers started almost immediately, hushed but audible in the quiet room, like the rustling of dry leaves. Office staff, dressed in crisp button-downs and polished shoes, glanced his way, their faces a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled scorn, their judgment as sharp as Tiffany's. A young woman adjusted her scarf, a look of mild distaste on her face, as if his very presence somehow contaminated the air, a source of unseen impurity. A man in a tailored suit held his phone to his ear, but his eyes kept darting towards Elias, a smug smirk playing on his lips, enjoying the silent spectacle of a perceived downfall. Elias endured it all, his gaze sweeping slowly, methodically across the room, taking in every detail, every nuance of this alien environment. He noticed the expensive artwork, abstract and meaningless, the polished chrome fixtures that reflected nothing of the land, the glaring lack of anything that spoke of actual ranching. No branding irons on display, no framed photos of prize cattle, no worn leather from a saddle. It was an office that could belong to any corporation, anywhere, utterly devoid of the unique spirit of Thorne Valley, a soulless shell. The constant drone of computers, the low murmur of conversations, the faint clinking of coffee cups, all blended into a symphony of indifference, a dirge for the ranch's lost soul. Elias, the patriarch, the very foundation of this empire, sat an invisible man in his own house, an outsider looking in at the changes wrought by a hand he no longer recognized, by a vision that scorned his own. The waiting was not just a test of his patience, but a crucible for his resolve, forging it into something harder, more unyielding than ever before. He watched, a predator in disguise, noting every weakness, every fracture in the gleaming facade. As Elias sat in the sterile waiting area, a quiet sentinel amidst the bustling indifference of the corporate staff, his senses sharpened, honed by decades of observing the subtle shifts in nature. He didn't just see, he observed, cataloging every detail with the precision of a hawk spotting prey. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable undercurrent of fear and resentment beneath the veneer of professional calm. The employees moved with a forced briskness, their smiles tight, their eyes darting nervously towards the glass-walled office of Brad Sterling whenever his booming voice cut through the hushed environment, a predator's growl echoing through a hushed jungle. This wasn't the vibrant, collaborative ranch culture Elias had meticulously cultivated over decades. This was a regime built on intimidation and superficiality, a delicate house of cards waiting for a strong wind. He saw the way a young woman flinched when Sterling's door opened, the way a man quickly tucked his phone away, their every movement an unconscious genuflection to their corporate overlord. He saw Tiffany, the formidable receptionist, snap at a young intern for a minor smudge on a document, her voice a whip crack that reverberated through the false calm. The intern's face flushed crimson, her shoulders slumping in defeat, a quiet despair radiating from her. Elias felt a deep, slow burn begin in his gut, a heat that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with a profound sense of violation. This was not merely about him. This was about the soul of Thorne Valley, about the people who gave it life, being systematically crushed. The ranch, he realized with a chilling certainty, wasn't just rotting from the inside. It was bleeding, hemorrhaging its very essence. Every instance of casual cruelty was a fresh wound. Then came the incident with Leo, a scene that would become etched into Elias' memory. A stable boy, perhaps 18 or 19, with earnest eyes that held a perpetual worried furrow in his brow, shuffled nervously into the main office, carrying a bridle that had clearly seen better days. He looked utterly out of place, a splash of genuine, earthy grit in an otherwise immaculate tableau, a defiant smudge of reality. Elias watched, a silent, unmoving presence, his gaze a laser-focused beam. Sterling's office door suddenly flew open, not gently, but with a violent force that made the glass walls tremble. The foreman himself emerged, a whirlwind of polished shoes and agitated gestures, his presence a disruptive force. His expensive suit, typically pristine, had a faint smear of grease on the lapel, an anomaly that seemed to infuriate him even more than the bridle itself, a blot on his perfect image. "Leo, what is this?" Sterling's voice, sharp and accusatory, echoed through the suddenly silent office, a sonic assault. The stable boy flinched, his eyes wide with fear like a cornered animal. "This bridle is falling apart. You expect my prize-winning show horse to wear this piece of junk? It's an embarrassment, a direct reflection on my asterisk management. Do you understand?" His words dripped with a manufactured outrage, masking a deeper insecurity. Leo stammered, his cheeks reddening, trying to find words through the suffocating fear. I cleaned it, sir, but it's old. We really need new equipment for the show horses. The leather's just cracking on all of them." His voice was barely a whisper, filled with a desperate plea for understanding, for the recognition of a legitimate problem. The raw, honest smell of horse and old leather clung to him, alien in the antiseptic office, a scent of truth Sterling despised. Sterling bristled, his face contorting in a sneer of pure contempt, his eyes narrow slits of fury. New equipment. Are you telling me how to run a budget, stable boy? Or are you just too lazy to properly care for what you have? This is a premium facility, Leo. We project an image of excellence. This looks like some backwater farm relic. You fix it, or you'll find yourself out on your ear. Now get out of my sight before you dirty up my office with your inefficiency." He gestured wildly, dismissing Leo with a flick of his wrist, as if swatting away an irritating insect. The sales representative, who was still in Sterling's office, witnessing the scene, visibly cringed but remained silent, a testament to Sterling's intimidating power. The young man's shoulders slumped, the weight of the injustice crushing him. He avoided eye contact with anyone, his face a mask of shame and defeat, his spirit visibly bruised. He clutched the old bridle, the leather warm and familiar in his hands, but now a symbol of his failure, of Sterling's scorn. Elias watched Leo's retreating figure, his heart aching with a familiar sorrow, a recognition of his own humiliation just moments ago. He saw a good, honest kid, passionate about the animals, being crushed under the weight of an uncaring, superficial system, a system that prioritized image over animal welfare, profit over people. This was the erosion of everything Elias had built, a ranch that had once prioritized the well-being of its animals and its people above all else, where a bridle was a tool, not a statement. He took mental notes, each harsh word from Sterling, each defeated glance from Leo, etching itself onto his memory, providing irrefutable evidence of the insidious rot. It wasn't just about disrespecting an old man in muddy boots. It was about systematically dismantling the values that gave Thorne Valley its true worth, tearing out its very foundation. The silence in the waiting area after Sterling's outburst was deafening, punctuated only by the nervous tapping of Tiffany's fingers on her keyboard, a desperate attempt to restore normalcy. Elias felt the familiar ache in his chest, a deep, sorrowful throb that spoke of a legacy under siege, a system corroding from within. The cold air of the office felt suddenly oppressive, heavy with the weight of unspoken fear and resentment. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the smells of polished wood and sterile cleaners wash over him, a stark reminder of how far this place had strayed from the raw, vibrant scent of honest labor and healthy soil. The true test of a ranch, he knew, wasn't in its gleaming offices, but in the health of its animals, the fertility of its land, and the spirit of its people. And in all three, under Sterling's reign, Thorne Valley was failing, not slowly but rapidly, like a wound festering unseen. The crisis was deeper than he had imagined. The mini-boss Sterling was far more destructive than a mere administrator. The tension in the waiting room was a thick, unmoving fog, heavy with the unspoken judgment of the corporate staff, each glance a whisper of complicity. Elias remained a silent, unmoving fixture in his uncomfortable plastic chair, absorbing the toxic atmosphere like dry earth absorbing rain, knowing that every droplet would contribute to the coming flood. He saw the nervous glances, the forced smiles, the way people averted their eyes when Sterling's door opened even slightly, a ritualistic avoidance of the gaze of power. The very air felt thin, devoid of the natural currents of a truly healthy workplace, stagnant and suffocating. His mind drifted back to a time when Thorne Valley pulsed with the genuine camaraderie of hard-working men and women, a stark contrast to this sterile, fear-infused tableau. He remembered a barn raising decades ago, where rival ranchers had come to help, united by the common bond of the land, sharing laughter and sweat, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and fresh-baked bread. That was the spirit Sterling had systematically eradicated, replaced with this cold, efficient machine. This wasn't merely a business. It was a living entity, and it was dying. It was then, in this sterile, emotionally starved environment, that a small, unexpected act of humanity cut through the chill, a single, defiant bloom in a barren landscape. Leo, the stable boy Sterling had just publicly berated, reappeared from a side hallway, looking even more dejected than before, his shoulders still slumped with the burden of undeserved shame. He carried a small, chipped ceramic mug, half filled with lukewarm coffee, a simple offering in a world of complex cruelty. His eyes, still red-rimmed from what might have been unshed tears, scanned the waiting room, not with fear, but with a quiet, searching empathy. They landed on Elias, an old man in mud-caked boots, looking as out of place and forgotten as Leo himself felt, two lone islands in a sea of indifference. A flicker of recognition, a shared understanding of being the other in this pristine world, passed between them, an unspoken bond forming in the silence. Leo hesitated for a moment, wrestling with his own apprehension. Then, with a quiet resolve that belied his earlier humiliation, he walked directly towards Elias. The other staff members barely registered his presence, too absorbed in their own screens and whispered conversations, their world too small to notice such quiet acts of grace. The scent of cheap, stale coffee wafted from the mug, but to Elias it was a sudden, poignant aroma, cutting through the sterile lemon polish and synthetic air like a breath of fresh, honest life. "Sir," Leo's voice was soft, barely above a whisper, hesitant yet sincere, a fragile offering. He held out the mug, his hand trembling slightly, not from weakness but from the raw courage of his act. I overheard. And you've been waiting a long time. It's just regular office coffee, but would you like some?" He didn't meet Elias' eyes fully, still scarred by his own recent public shaming, but his gesture was one of pure, unadulterated kindness, a rare commodity in these gleaming halls. His uniform, faintly smelling of hay and honest sweat, felt like a breath of fresh air in the stuffy room, a reminder of the true heart of the ranch. Elias looked at the young man, his weathered face softening almost imperceptibly, a profound warmth spreading through the cold shell he had built around himself. He saw not just a stable boy, but a spark of the integrity and genuine care that had once defined Thorne Valley, a glimmer of hope in the encroaching darkness. This boy, humiliated and belittled, was the only one who had offered a gesture of human decency, a lifeline in a sea of scorn. "Thank you, son," Elias said, his voice a low rumble accepting the mug. His fingers, rough from a lifetime of labor, brushed Leo's, and he felt the surprising warmth of the ceramic, a small yet profound connection. "That's very kind of you." The simple taste of the coffee, bitter and plain, was a balm, a testament to the unexpected comfort found in a shared moment of humanity. Leo risked a glance around the room, then lowered his voice even further, leaning in conspiratorially, a shared secret between them. "I'm sorry for how they're treating you, sir. And what Mr. Sterling said, he gets like that. Thinks he's better than everyone." A flash of defiance, raw and honest, appeared in his young eyes, a flicker of the fire that burned beneath his timid exterior. "They forgot where the milk comes from, sir. They think it just shows up in a carton in the fridge." He offered a small, sad smile, a sentiment that resonated deep within Elias' bones, a profound truth articulated by an unlikely prophet. This kid understood. He understood the fundamental connection to the land, to the animals, to the hard work that formed the bedrock of everything. He understood that true value wasn't found in polished surfaces or corporate jargon, but in the gritty reality of the ranch, in the integrity of its labor, and the health of its soil. He saw the truth, unvarnished by pretense, even when others were blind. Elias took another slow sip of coffee, savoring the warmth, the quiet camaraderie that had blossomed in this sterile space. "Some people forget more than just where the milk comes from, son," he replied, his gaze distant, unfocused, seeing beyond the walls of the office to the vast, living land outside, a landscape he had shaped and cherished. He saw the rolling hills, the grazing cattle, the clear skies, and felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet certainty blooming within him. This moment, this unexpected act of kindness, anchored the emotional core of his entire mission, solidifying his resolve. Leo, the stable boy, had passed the true test. He had seen past the tattered flannel and mud-caked boots to the human being underneath, a humility and empathy utterly absent in the gleaming, soulless corridors of Sterling's corporate dream. Elias felt a quiet certainty bloom within him. The ranch wasn't completely lost. Not yet. Not while there were still people like Leo who remembered the truth of the land, who honored its spirit and understood its foundational rhythms. The fight was far from over. It had merely found its true ally. This reflective pause, fueled by a simple cup of coffee, had revealed the uncorrupted heart of Thorne Valley. The clock on the pristine wall ticked on, each second echoing with the weight of Elias' patient endurance, a steady march towards an inevitable confrontation. The stale coffee, now cold, sat beside him, a forgotten vessel of a profound encounter. He had watched the ebb and flow of corporate life for what felt like an eternity, the hollow echoes of Sterling's authority still hanging in the air, a constant, irritating hum. He had observed the nervous glances, the subtle shifts in power dynamics, the carefully constructed facade of order barely concealing the fear and resentment beneath. His mind, ancient and sharp, sifted through every detail, every hushed conversation, every clipped instruction, assembling a meticulous case against Sterling's reign. He remembered the precise wording of the contract that had placed Sterling in charge during his self-imposed, but now deeply regretted, sabbatical, a contract designed to ensure the ranch's continuity, not its degradation. He had granted Sterling broad operational control, trusting in the man's supposed business acumen, but had retained ultimate authority through Thorne Industries, a layer Sterling had clearly chosen to ignore or forget in his relentless pursuit of personal empire. The papers in his pocket were the undeniable proof, the forgotten key to his kingdom. Finally, a resolve, hard and unyielding as granite, settled within him. He had seen enough. The time for observation was over. It was time for confrontation, for the reclamation of what was rightfully his. He pushed himself up from the uncomfortable chair, his joints protesting with a soft groan, the sound a low warning. But his movement carried an unexpected gravitas, a deliberate, slow power that drew the eye. His boots, still trailing faint traces of mud, crunched softly on the polished tile as he walked deliberately towards Sterling's imposing office door, each step a declaration. The glass walls offered a tantalizing, distorted view of the man within, pacing restlessly, talking animatedly into a phone, oblivious to the storm gathering just outside his opulent cage. Elias ignored Tiffany's startled gasp, the sudden silence that fell over the waiting area as all eyes snapped to him, a collective intake of breath. He was a force of nature, slow but unstoppable, a tsunami building on the horizon. He reached the frosted glass door, his hand, gnarled and strong from a lifetime of labor, reaching for the handle. Before he could turn it, the door swung open from the inside, and Brad Sterling himself stepped out, still mid-sentence on his phone, his face flushed with some corporate triumph, his eyes gleaming with self-satisfaction. He was a picture of sleek, modern authority, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his cologne a sharp, manufactured scent that clashed violently with the faint, earthy aroma clinging to Elias, an olfactory clash of two worlds. Sterling stopped dead, his eyes widening slightly as he registered the old man standing directly in his path, an unwelcome apparition. His gaze immediately dropped to Elias' mud-caked boots, then swept upwards, taking in the tattered flannel, the weathered face, the air of unapologetic soil that clung to him like a second skin. A look of utter disgust, a visceral revulsion, contorted Sterling's features, as if Elias were a physical manifestation of everything he despised. He pulled the phone from his ear, his conversation abruptly forgotten, the urgent business suddenly rendered trivial by this dirty intrusion. "What in the blazes are you doing, old man?" Sterling's voice was a low snarl, vibrating with barely contained fury, a guttural sound of barely controlled rage. He gestured wildly at Elias' boots, then at the floor, as if they were defiling sacred ground. "Do you not see this? This is a professional environment. You're tracking mud all over my floor. This entire building is spotless. And what is that smell?" He took a step back, recoiling as if Elias' very presence was an affront to his sensibilities, a contamination. "Get back to the waiting area. You think you can just barge in here?" His voice rose, demanding compliance, demanding subservience. Elias remained unperturbed, his calm a stark contrast to Sterling's agitation, like the still eye of a hurricane. He reached slowly, deliberately, into his inside pocket, retrieving a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with the embossed gold crest of Thorne Industries. It was a simple, unassuming object, yet its contents held the power to shatter Sterling's meticulously constructed world, to unravel his carefully spun web of deceit. The paper felt heavy, substantial in his calloused fingers, weighty with the truth it contained. "Mr. Sterling," Elias began, his voice quiet but resonant, carrying an undeniable authority that Sterling, blinded by his fury and contempt, utterly failed to recognize. "I just need you to look at these papers. It's important." He extended the envelope, offering it like a peace treaty or a final warning, the choice subtly his. His eyes, though ancient, held a sharp, unwavering focus that should have given Sterling pause, should have triggered a flicker of recognition, a primal warning. Sterling, however, was beyond reason, lost in the labyrinth of his own inflated ego. His face was a mask of furious contempt, a grotesque caricature of power. He saw only a ragged old man, an intrusion, a dirty stain on his pristine corporate canvas, a threat to his carefully curated image. The audacity of this bum to hand him anything. "I don't want your dirty papers, you senile fool," he roared, his voice echoing through the stunned office, a brutal declaration of dismissal. With a violent, dismissive swipe of his hand, he knocked the envelope from Elias' grasp. It fluttered, a brief, fragile bird of fate, before landing with a soft, sickening splat in a small puddle of mud Elias' boots had left near the doorway, a pool of evidence. The gold crest, now soiled and smudged, seemed to mock the very foundation of its authority, defiled by the hand it sought to command. A collective gasp rippled through the waiting area. Tiffany, her eyes wide with shock, clapped a hand over her mouth, a silent witness to the desecration. Elias' eyes narrowed, a cold, dangerous glint replacing the calm, a gathering storm. The rain outside, which had been holding back, chose that moment to unleash itself in a sudden, furious downpour, drumming against the glass walls, mirroring the tempest that had just erupted within. The air grew thick with unspoken words, with the heavy weight of the insult, the desecration of the trust Elias had placed in this man. Sterling, oblivious to the deeper currents, merely stood, chest heaving, triumphant in his petty victory, unaware he had just signed his own death warrant. "Security," he bellowed, his voice filled with righteous indignation, with the conviction of a man utterly in the right. "Get this trespasser off my property, now." Elias did not fight, did not resist. He merely turned, his quiet dignity intact, and walked slowly towards the glass doors, leaving the soiled envelope behind. A deliberate act, a seed planted in the mud, destined to sprout an unstoppable truth. He had shown the hand of power, and it had been rejected, scorned. He had delivered his final warning, and it had been tossed aside, shredded. He had seen everything he needed to see. The crisis was complete, the mini-boss's ignorance confirmed. The rain, now a torrential downpour, plastered Elias' tattered flannel to his skin as he walked away from the Thorne Valley headquarters. The cold seeped into his bones, a physical ache, but the chill that truly gnawed at him was the icy contempt he had just experienced, a deeper, more profound wound. He didn't look back, his stride steady, his resolve hardening with every painful, deliberate step through the slick mud, each movement a silent vow. He felt the sting of the insult, yes, but more acutely, he felt the deep, almost physical ache of a legacy tarnished, a dream unraveling under the uncaring hand of arrogance. The very ground beneath his muddy boots felt violated, the earth itself groaning under the weight of such profound disrespect. He walked away, not in defeat, but in quiet, seething calculation, the architect of a vengeance only he could truly understand. He had walked into his own house a ghost, and he would return a king. Inside the hushed, stunned office, the aftershocks of Sterling's outburst still rippled, a tremor of disbelief and unease. Tiffany, pale and wide-eyed, stared at the muddy envelope lying forlornly by the door, a discarded prophecy. The other staff members exchanged nervous glances, whispering, their fear mingling with a dawning, uncomfortable curiosity. No one dared to touch it, as if the mud or the old man's perceived poverty were contagious, a blight to be avoided. Sterling had retreated into his office, no doubt reveling in his perceived dominance, oblivious to the precariousness of his triumph. But Leo, the stable boy, was different. He had witnessed the entire brutal exchange, his young heart sinking with each of Sterling's cruel words, a mirror of his own recent humiliation. He felt a deep, instinctive pity for the old man, a familiar ache of seeing someone dismissed and devalued, a kindred spirit in the corporate wilderness. After Sterling disappeared back into his office, slamming the door shut, Leo hesitated. He knew he shouldn't interfere, shouldn't draw any more attention to himself, shouldn't challenge the established hierarchy, but something compelled him, a force stronger than fear. The thought of that envelope, discarded and ruined, bothered him. It felt disrespectful, not just to the old man, but to the land itself, to the very concept of something important being tossed aside like trash, a desecration of value. With a furtive glance at Tiffany, who was now busying herself with her computer, pretending not to notice, pretending the incident had never happened, Leo moved. His movements were quick, economical, the practiced grace of someone used to navigating stables and fields, of quiet, purposeful work. He knelt down, the knees of his work pants instantly soaking up the water and mud from the tile floor, a mark of his true nature. His fingers, still smelling faintly of horse and hay, carefully picked up the envelope. It was surprisingly heavy, the paper thick and substantial, clearly not the cheap junk Sterling had dismissed it as. The mud had seeped into the edges, blurring the fine details, but the embossed gold crest, though smudged, was still discernible. Thorne Industries Confidential. Leo's brow furrowed, a silent battle of comprehension. Thorne Industries. That was the asterisk parent company, the almost mythical entity that owned Thorne Valley, the name whispered in reverence among the older ranch hands, a symbol of immense power and heritage. He'd only ever seen that crest on official, highly important documents, usually kept locked away in Sterling's private vault, not discarded on the floor like refuse. His fingers almost unconsciously traced the muddy outline of the seal, feeling the raised texture of history. Curiosity, a powerful, insistent whisper, compelled him. He couldn't just throw it away without knowing what it was. What if it was something important the old man had legitimately tried to deliver? What if Sterling's ignorance had crossed a line far more dangerous than mere rudeness? His gaze drifted to a small, secluded break room at the back of the office, usually empty this time of day, a sanctuary of privacy. He slipped away, the muddy envelope clutched in his hand, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and a strange, burgeoning sense of intrigue. He entered the break room, the fluorescent lights humming, casting a cold, even glow on the sterile surfaces. He placed the envelope carefully on a clean, laminated countertop, away from the persistent drip of a leaky faucet. His fingers, still trembling slightly, worked at the mud-caked edges, slowly, carefully peeling back the folds, a hesitant unveiling of truth. The document inside was crisp, formal, printed on heavy stock paper, exuding an air of undeniable authority. His eyes, quick and scanning, immediately fell upon the bold, capital letters at the top: Transfer of Management Authority. Below that, his gaze raced, skipping over legal jargon, seeking out the key phrases. Effective immediately, full operational control, all assets and liabilities. Elias Thorne, founder and chairman. His breath hitched, caught in his throat. Elias Thorne, the old man, the drifter in the muddy boots, the man Sterling had just publicly humiliated and thrown out into the rain. A name almost whispered in reverence among the older ranch hands, a legend, the Elias Thorne, the very patriarch of this sprawling empire. The realization hit Leo like a physical blow, a sudden, blinding flash of insight that stole the air from his lungs. The old man wasn't just an asterisk owner. He was the asterisk owner, the founder, the original king of this entire valley. Sterling, the arrogant, polished foreman, had just assaulted and fired the man who owned everything he stood on, everything he claimed as his own. The weight of the document in Leo's hands felt suddenly immense, hot with the gravity of the truth, heavy with the burden of revelation. His mind reeled, a whirlwind of disbelief, shock, and a dawning sense of terrifying urgency. He had to tell Sterling. He had to make him understand the colossal mistake he had just made. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of impending disaster, a catastrophe of Sterling's own making. He gripped the document, its edges still faintly damp with the mud of the ranch, a physical link between the profound truth and the earth from which it sprung, and ran. He had to stop the catastrophe that was hurtling towards them, a disaster of Sterling's own making, before it was too late. The smell of printer ink, of official paper, suddenly mingled with the fading scent of horse, a confusing blend of his two worlds, colliding in a single, earth-shattering moment, a potent cocktail of revelation and fear. Leo burst out of the break room, the crumpled, mud-stained document clutched in his hand like a lifeline, a desperate plea for recognition. His chest heaved, his face flushed, his eyes wide with a desperate, burgeoning alarm that could no longer be contained. He could barely contain the seismic truth that had just shattered his understanding of the world, a truth that threatened to bring down the entire, meticulously constructed facade of Thorne Valley. Tiffany looked up, startled by his sudden, frantic appearance, her perfectly arched eyebrows rising in annoyance at his blatant disregard for decorum. But Leo didn't even register her. Her judgments were suddenly meaningless. His sole focus, his single desperate beacon, was Brad Sterling. He could hear Sterling's booming laugh from his office, the arrogant sound echoing through the glass walls, a cruel celebration of his perceived dominance. It was lunchtime, and the foreman was clearly entertaining someone, probably reveling in his perceived victory over the old beggar, recounting the tale of his triumphant dismissal of the ragged old man. Leo hesitated for only a fraction of a second, then pushed through Sterling's office door without knocking, a blatant breach of protocol that would normally earn him an immediate dressing down, perhaps even the same fate as the old man. Sterling sat at his opulent desk, a half-eaten gourmet sandwich in one hand, a smirk on his face as he regaled a visiting sales representative with a story, his voice dripping with self-congratulation. The office smelled of expensive leather, a faint hint of his cologne and the savory aroma of his lunch, a symphony of his chosen decadence. The sales rep, a man in a gleaming suit, chuckled politely, a forced, nervous sound. Sterling looked up, his expression instantly transforming from jovial to furious at Leo's abrupt intrusion, his eyes flashing with proprietary rage. "Leo, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" Sterling's voice was a low growl, an ominous warning that promised dire consequences. "I told you not to bother me. Is this about that bridal again? Because if it is, you're about to be walking off this property, whether it's raining or not." He punctuated his threat with a dismissive wave of his sandwich-filled hand. Leo ignored the threat, his own voice, usually timid, now strained with urgency and a raw, trembling conviction that defied his fear. "Boss, you don't understand. That old man, the one you just threw out, he's not a bum. He's the owner. He's Elias Thorne. I found this." He thrust the mud-stained envelope and its contents forward, holding it out like a sacred, damning artifact, a physical manifestation of the undeniable truth. The paper, still damp, felt heavy and ominous, a weight that could crush an empire. Sterling paused, his eyes narrowing, taking in the crumpled, dirty document, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. A slow, condescending laugh rumbled in his chest, growing in volume until it filled the office, a harsh, dismissive sound. The sales representative, unsure how to react, offered a nervous, forced smile caught between the two men. Sterling found it utterly hilarious, a preposterous joke. "The owner, that old fool, don't be stupid, kid. That guy couldn't afford a tractor tire, let alone this ranch. Look at him. He looked like he crawled out of a ditch. You think that asterisk is Elias Thorne, the man who built this empire. He's probably some senile drifter who wandered onto the property looking for a handout." He shook his head, still chuckling, as if Leo had just told the funniest joke he'd heard all day, completely blind to the abyss opening beneath his feet. He snatched the document from Leo's trembling hand, his fingers barely touching the mud as if it would contaminate him, pollute his pristine world. He barely glanced at the Thorne Industries confidential seal, dismissing it as a fake, a prop in some old man's delusion, a childish trick. His eyes, clouded by arrogance, by a deeply ingrained inability to see beyond the superficial, couldn't pierce through the mud and the tattered flannel to see the truth, the profound, undeniable reality. Transfer of management authority. "This is a joke, a bad joke," he laughed again, a harsh, dismissive sound that grated on Leo's ears, echoing the destruction he was about to unleash. "You think I'm that easily fooled, Leo? That I'd believe some tramp's ramblings because he handed you some fake papers?" Before Leo could protest, before he could try to explain the significance of the seal, the heavy paper, the specific wording, Sterling, with a flourish of contemptuous impatience, began to tear the document, each ripping sound a hammer blow to Leo's heart. Re-yip. The sound was sharp, definitive, tearing not just paper but Leo's last shred of hope, his desperate attempt to avert disaster. Re-yip. Re-yip. The elegant words, the official crest, the legally binding instructions, all reduced to muddy, meaningless confetti scattered across Sterling's polished desk like so much trash. The scent of ink and expensive paper, mixed with the damp earth, now hung in the air, a scent of irreversible destruction, of a profound and tragic folly. "There," Sterling declared, tossing the shredded pieces onto his polished desk like so much trash, his face alight with smug satisfaction. "Problem solved. Now you listen to me, Leo. You're either incredibly naive or incredibly insubordinate, bringing me this garbage and daring to question my judgment. I'm running a multi-million-dollar operation here, not a charity for confused old men or starry-eyed stable boys. Your job is to muck out stalls and keep your mouth shut, not play detective. Your insubordination is unacceptable, and frankly, your idiocy is a liability." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper, a predator delivering a killing blow. You know what happens to liabilities at Thorne Valley, Leo. They get cut. You're fired, get off my property, now. The words hung heavy in the air, cold and final, crushing Leo's spirit. Leo felt a dizzying wave of despair wash over him, a physical nausea. His stomach clenched. He had tried. He had tried to prevent a disaster, to speak truth to power, and for his trouble he had lost everything: his job, his future, his sense of belonging. He looked at Sterling, at the smug, unyielding face, and then at the shredded papers, a testament to unchecked arrogance, to a blindness that would inevitably lead to ruin. The air in the office, once thick with the scent of lunch, now felt heavy with the bitter taste of injustice, a suffocating weight. Leo turned, his shoulders slumping even further, and walked out, his steps slow and heavy, the weight of his own sudden unemployment crushing him, a silent casualty of Sterling's hubris. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate and unknowingly sealing Sterling's as well, for the seeds of reckoning had already been sown in the mud and fury of that day. This was crisis too, and the price of truth was immediate, devastating loss. The next morning the rain had finally given way to a crisp, clear sky, but the ground was still heavy with mud, glistening under the pale, rising sun. A palpable tension hung in the air over Thorne Valley cattle empire, thick and suffocating. Word had spread like wildfire through the ranch. Sterling had fired Leo, the young stable boy, for some perceived insubordination, for the audacious act of bringing him fake papers. The incident with the old beggar the previous day was whispered about, dismissed by most as Sterling's usual heavy-handedness, another example of his unpredictable tyranny. The staff, already wary and accustomed to walking on eggshells, felt a new layer of apprehension settle over them. They knew Sterling was volatile, but firing a kid like Leo for such a seemingly minor transgression felt particularly cruel, a brutal reminder of their own precarious positions. The collective fear was a tangible entity, tightening around their throats. The morning routine, usually a symphony of lowing cattle and the distant rumble of machinery, was punctuated by a nervous, expectant hum, an unsettling stillness. Sterling had announced that a VIP investor was arriving to tour the facilities, a high-stakes meeting that would, he claimed, secure the ranch's future and implicitly his own position, cementing his absolute power. He had demanded that the entire corporate staff and even some of the ranch hands line up, polished and presentable, outside the main office. The scene was set for a display of corporate efficiency and modern agricultural prowess, a meticulously choreographed performance designed to impress and deceive. The employees stood stiffly in formation, their clean boots gleaming on the damp asphalt, their faces a mixture of anticipation and unease, their smiles forced. The air smelled of damp earth, diesel, and a nervous collective sweat, a potent cocktail of apprehension. A low rumble began to build on the distant access road, growing steadily louder, a sound that resonated deep in the chest. Soon, a convoy appeared on the horizon, not the single, sleek sedan Sterling usually arrived in, but a procession of 4 imposing, black SUVs, their windows tinted, their chrome accents glinting in the morning light like predatory eyes. They moved with an almost ceremonial slowness, kicking up minimal spray from the puddles, their tires humming a serious, authoritative tune, a clear declaration of immense power. The staff exchanged glances, a ripple of nervous excitement passing through them, a fragile hope that this VIP might bring a change, a reprieve from Sterling's iron fist. This was clearly someone important, someone to be appeased. Tiffany, standing beside Sterling, smoothed her skirt, a hopeful, expectant smile plastered on her face, dreaming of promotions and greater influence. Sterling himself, resplendent in a fresh, expensive suit, stood at the front of the line, his chest puffed out, a smug, confident grin fixed on his lips. He imagined this VIP, impressed by his leadership, cementing his power, validating his reign, oblivious to the storm about to break. The lead SUV glided to a silent halt directly in front of the main entrance, followed by the others, their engines cutting in a synchronized hush, plunging the scene into an almost unnatural quiet, a suspended moment of dread, a moment stretched, thick with anticipation, each breath held. Then the rear door of the first SUV opened, slowly, deliberately, revealing a shadowed figure within. A figure emerged. It was Elias Thorne. He was dressed in the exact same tattered flannel shirt, the same mud-caked denim overalls, the same worn muck boots from the day before. The rain had dried, leaving his clothes stiff with dried earth, his hair slightly disheveled, an undeniable testament to his authenticity. He looked precisely like the old beggar Sterling had scorned, a living, breathing ghost of the past returned. But this time, he was not alone. Flanking him were two formidable individuals, a stern-faced woman in a sharp business suit, carrying a heavy leather briefcase that seemed to hum with legal authority, and a broad-shouldered man with the cold, watchful eyes of a corporate lawyer, his presence a silent threat. Behind them, from the other SUVs, emerged more impeccably dressed figures, their expressions grave and professional, a phalanx of power. A collective, audible gasp swept through the assembled staff, a sound of shock and dawning horror. Tiffany's jaw dropped, her hand flying to her mouth, a silent scream frozen in place. The confident smiles on the faces of the other corporate managers dissolved into looks of utter disbelief and dawning horror, their carefully constructed world beginning to crack. The ranch hands, those who had seen Elias yesterday, stood frozen, their eyes darting between the humble figure and the powerful entourage, a silent understanding passing among them. The truth, stark and undeniable, hung in the crisp morning air, more chilling than any winter wind, more profound than any lie Sterling had ever spun. Sterling's face, moments before radiating smug confidence, went utterly slack, all pretense of composure crumbling. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him a ghastly white, a stark contrast to his fresh suit. His confident posture crumbled, his shoulders slumping as if he had just been struck by an invisible blow, a spiritual assault. His eyes, wide with a sudden, sickening realization, darted from Elias' mud-stained boots to the stern faces of the lawyers, then back to Elias' calm, unwavering gaze, searching for an escape, a denial that wasn't there. The reality, brutal and inescapable, crashed over him like a tidal wave, drowning him in its icy depths. This wasn't some senile drifter. This was Elias Thorne, the founder, the owner, the king. And Sterling, in his monumental arrogance, had thrown him out, torn up his orders, and fired the only honest man who had tried to warn him. The very ground seemed to tilt beneath Sterling's feet. His throat tightened, a bitter metallic taste rising in his mouth, the taste of profound defeat. The cold dread that gripped him was absolute, a crushing, irreversible force. He saw his meticulously built world, his carefully cultivated image of power and control, shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The hum of the ranch, usually a comforting sound, now felt like a mocking, derisive laugh, echoing his downfall. Elias Thorne stepped forward, his mud-caked boots crunching softly on the asphalt, the sound strangely amplified in the sudden, terrified silence, each crunch a definitive statement. He didn't need to speak. His presence, flanked by the silent, unyielding figures of power and legal authority, was enough. The realization hit Sterling like a speeding truck, leaving him breathless, dizzy, and utterly, profoundly undone. The irony, brutal and absolute, was a weight too heavy to bear, a poetic justice that left him gasping for air. This was the turning point, the innovation of Elias' quiet, devastating strategy. Elias Thorne stopped a few feet from Brad Sterling, his gaze, though calm, holding the weight of a storm, the accumulated scorn and injustice of the past 24 hours. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the gentle rustle of the wind, sounds of the land reclaiming its voice. Sterling, pale and trembling, found his voice caught in his throat, a pathetic croak, unable to conjure a single word, every arrogant retort from yesterday now a crushing millstone around his neck. His confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of raw, undisguised terror, his eyes wide with desperate, frantic denial. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between Elias and the lawyers, searching for an escape that simply wasn't there, a phantom exit from his rapidly collapsing reality. The cold sweat that slicked his forehead felt like icy rain, a chilling premonition of the judgment to come. Elias finally spoke, his voice quiet, a low rumble that nonetheless carried absolute authority, cutting through the thick tension like a honed blade. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his tone devoid of anger, for Elias had moved beyond such petty emotions, yet laced with an undeniable, chilling disappointment, a profound condemnation. "Yesterday I came to my ranch, the one I built with my own hands, with the sweat of generations and the wisdom of the earth, to conduct a quiet inspection. I wanted to see firsthand how things were being managed, how the people I employ were being treated, how my legacy was being upheld." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled staff, who stood frozen, their faces a tableau of shock and shame, silent witnesses to their own complicity and fear. "What I found," Elias continued, his voice gaining a subtle edge, a razor-sharp precision, "was a culture of disrespect, of arrogance, and of a profound disconnection from the very earth that sustains us, from the animals that nourish us, and from the honest labor that built this empire. I saw a young man, earnest and hardworking, humiliated for a minor, unavoidable issue with equipment that should have been replaced, a boy whose spirit was crushed for merely speaking truth to power. And I saw that same young man," Elias' eyes fixed on Sterling, piercing him like daggers, exposing his rotten core, "fired for the sole insubordination of attempting to tell you the truth, of trying to save you from your own colossal ignorance." Sterling tried to stammer a protest, a desperate, pathetic attempt at self-defense, his voice cracking with fear. "Sir, I didn't know. He looked like he was just a drifter. Those papers, I thought they were fake. It was a misunderstanding." His voice cracked, desperation making it high-pitched and unconvincing, each word ringing hollow. He could feel the eyes of every employee on him, their silent judgment a crushing weight, heavier than any physical blow. The scent of his own fear was now mingling with the fresh morning air, a bitter, metallic tang that choked him. Elias raised a hand, a simple gesture that silenced Sterling immediately, cutting off his pathetic pleas. "Ignorance, Mr. Sterling, is rarely an excuse, particularly when it stems from a willful blindness to character and worth, when it is born of arrogance and contempt. You judged me by my clothes. You judged Leo by his position. You judged this ranch by its polished floors and its automated drones, not by the health of its soil or the spirit of its people. You chased an image, and you lost the soul." Elias then gestured to Leo, who had quietly emerged from the back of the crowd, his face a mixture of bewilderment and a nascent hope, a quiet hero unknowingly stepping into the light. He still wore his work clothes, his hands grimy from morning chores, a living symbol of authentic labor and integrity. "You fired this boy," Elias stated, his voice resonating with an undeniable moral authority, a force of nature, for telling the truth, for seeing past the superficial to the core of what truly matters, for possessing a rare and precious empathy. Now, he paused, letting the words hang in the air, cold and definitive, each syllable a pronouncement of fate. I'm firing you for being blind, for failing to understand the fundamental values upon which Thorne Valley was built, for choosing arrogance over integrity, for valuing appearance over substance, for tearing up the very document that detailed the transfer of authority, believing it to be a tramp's delusion, when in fact, it was the final, formal notice of your immediate termination and the return of legitimate control to me, the founder and chairman. The pronouncement hung in the air, a bell tolling the end of Sterling's reign, a resounding gong of justice. Sterling staggered back, as if physically struck, his face contorting in a silent scream of disbelief and humiliation, his world shattering around him. The senior lawyer, the stern-faced woman, stepped forward, her briefcase clicking open with an ominous finality. "Mr. Sterling," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion, a professional executioner, "your termination is effective immediately. All access to Thorne Valley resources, financial accounts, and premises is revoked. Security will escort you off the property. Any attempts to access Thorne Valley assets or facilities will be met with immediate and severe legal action. Your severance package, reflecting your gross misconduct, will be minimal." Sterling, utterly broken, could only manage a choked sound, a mixture of rage and despair, a guttural gasp of his last vestiges of power. Two security guards, employees Sterling himself had ordered around mercilessly, now moved in with grim faces, taking his arms, their touch a physical representation of his loss of control. He offered no resistance, his arrogance finally shattered, replaced by the crushing weight of his colossal failure, his hubris having led him directly to this precipice. As they led him away, past the stunned, silent faces of the staff, his expensive, clean boots finally scuffed through the same mud he had so vehemently despised just yesterday, a perfect, bitter irony. The poetic justice was undeniable, a raw, bitter taste in his mouth, his once gleaming image now irretrievably sullied by the very earth he scorned. This was symmetrical catharsis, a fall from grace as spectacular as his rise had been arrogant. Elias turned, his gaze softening, the storm receding from his eyes as he looked at Leo, the young man who had dared to show kindness, who had risked everything for truth. "Leo," he said, his voice warm, a stark contrast to his earlier severity, brimming with a quiet admiration. "You showed more wisdom, more courage, and more respect for this land and its people in a single day than Mr. Sterling did in his entire tenure here. You saw the truth when others were blind, and you acted with integrity when faced with fear." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys, heavy, substantial keys, not just for a vehicle, but for the entire operational hub of the ranch, for the main office, for the critical infrastructure Sterling had neglected. He also retrieved a pristine, new envelope, strikingly similar to the one Sterling had torn, but this one bore Leo's name, crisp and unblemished. "This ranch doesn't just need a manager who understands balance sheets, Leo. It needs a manager who understands where the milk comes from, someone who values the soil beneath their feet and the creatures in their care, someone who sees people, not just their positions, not just their potential for profit." He handed the keys and the envelope to Leo. The young man's hands trembled as he accepted them, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and profound gratitude, a staggering weight of responsibility settling upon his young shoulders. "The keys to the main ranch office, effective immediately," Elias stated, and a scholarship for advanced agricultural management studies at the finest university we can arrange. This ranch is built on hard work and respect, Leo, not on polished floors and corporate greed. I want you to manage it, to grow, to learn, to innovate, to help me restore Thorne Valley to its true glory, to bring it back to the sustainable, ethical legacy it was always meant to be. This is your turning point, your chance to lead with heart. Leo, overwhelmed, could only nod, tears welling in his eyes, a silent testament to the magnitude of the trust placed in him. He looked down at the heavy keys, then at the envelope, then back at Elias, a silent vow passing between them, a promise to honor the land and the people. Elias then turned to address the remaining staff, his voice carrying across the silent expanse, reaching every corner of the courtyard. This is a new beginning for Thorne Valley, a return to our roots, to the values of stewardship, integrity, and genuine care. From now on, our focus will be on sustainable practices, on animal welfare that goes beyond mere compliance, and on the people who make this ranch great, who work the land with their hands and their hearts. No one will ever be judged by the mud on their boots here, only by the integrity in their hearts and the effort in their hands, for those are the true measures of a person's worth. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the vast, open fields, then back to the gleaming, yet now humbled corporate office, a building that would soon be repurposed. A small, knowing smile touched his lips, a flicker of the ancient wisdom that had seen empires rise and fall. The best fertilizer for the land, Elias concluded, his voice imbued with the wisdom of decades, echoing across the valley, is the footprint of the owner. And you, Mr. Sterling, were never truly here, not in any way that mattered. The sun, now fully risen, cast a golden glow over the Thorne Valley, illuminating not just the land but a new, righteous beginning, a future forged in truth and soil. Elias the patriarch had returned, and the land itself seemed to sigh in relief, ready to be nurtured back to its vibrant self. The quantifiable escalation of this moral victory resonated through every employee, a palpable shift from fear to cautious hope, a new dawn for the sprawling empire. Leo, now empowered with not just a position but a purpose, understood that his journey in Thorne Valleys had just truly begun, filled with challenges and triumphs yet to unfold. And so the seeds of a new beginning were sown, fertilized by integrity and the bitter ashes of arrogance. Thorne Valley began its reclamation, a testament to true stewardship. But as the sun sets on one era of greed, a silent question lingers in the dust stirred by the wind. How many other empires lie vulnerable, their true owners obscured by the very systems designed to dismiss them, their quiet power waiting to be unleashed? The soil remembers.